Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. For legal reasons, let me say this video is being offered for entertainment purposes only. Let's talk about this upcoming fight between David Price, unbeaten, and Tony Thompson. Now, people know that I've been pushing for David Price to fight for the heavyweight title against a Klitschko, right? Either Vladimir or Vitaly. The logic isn't that I feel that David Price walks through or beats a Klitschko, but the point is the risk-reward isn't worth it for Price to fight very tough contenders who might beat him, right? Any loss to a contender will set him back several months, if not years. And of course, if you look at the Klitschko brothers, notably Vitaly Klitschko might not still be active in the sport of boxing in a year or so. So my logic is take the payday. If you have the punch that David Price has, you're always one punch away from a knockout victory, if you can land it. Right? I'd rather have a fighter fight for the title than to have a fighter have the mistaken belief, and it is mistaken, that if they just have more fights against increasingly dangerous opposition, they're ready for that opposition, and they can win the fights, improve, and better prepare themselves for the heavyweight championship. Understand, one false move, one misstep, and you fall down the staircase. I believe David Price has made that mistake. I like Tony Thompson to beat David Price, hedged against Price by KO. It's absurd to me to believe that David Price, after 15 fights, thinks that he is ready to step in the ring with a seasoned heavyweight contender who's a very tough matchup to begin with. Keep in mind, Tony Thompson is a southpaw. He looked awful in the last Vladimir Klitschko fight, got knocked out. But that was the second fight Thompson had against Vladimir Klitschko. The first fight went several rounds and was highly competitive. If you don't believe me, just Google the CompuBox numbers from Tony Thompson's first fight against Vladimir Klitschko. Look at the resume of Tony Thompson. Tony Thompson has fought several contenders in addition to fighting the heavyweight champion. Now let's talk about the skills of these two fighters. They're both tall guys, but understand Tony Thompson literally has spent his life getting around a guy in an orthodox stance who's sticking a jab. David Price looks great on film, but understand when David Price is stopping the likes of Audley Harrison inside of one round, we simply don't know what happens if David Price is forced to go several rounds against a guy who has only lost to two men in his career, and one of them, of course, was the heavyweight champion. Right? Also, David Price's defense, highly suspect. As you look at films, you're not going to see David Price moving his head a lot or with his hands up a lot. No, David Price uses his legs for defense, right? He tries to hang outside, right? That's his game. He tries to hang outside and stay outside. Expect Tony Thompson to close the distance between the two of them, right? I would say just on pure boxing ability, the ability to score points in the middle of the ring, Tony Thompson's much better than David Price, right? David Price is a knockout puncher. He's a power guy. Tony Thompson gets knockouts, but Tony Thompson also has boxing skill. Now, Thompson seems to have a weird relationship with Vladimir Klitschko. If you look at the end of the Thompson-Klitschko fight, you're going to see that that's one of the few fights, where Vladimir Klitschko abandoned his shell. You know how Klitschko always sticks a jab, is always sideways, always has his hands up, right? Is very cautious. Well, at Emanuel Stewart's urging, he opened up a bit, right? He, against Tony Thompson, literally decided he would let his hands go. The strategy caught Thompson off guard because, of course, Thompson had been in the ring for several rounds with a cautious Vladimir Klitschko in the first fight. Thompson was unprepared and was a bit intimidated by Vladimir Klitschko completely opening up. Now, if David Price thinks that in his first fight against Tony Thompson, he has Thompson's angles figured out to the point where he can open up like Vladimir Klitschko did. And keep in mind, Klitschko only opens up after seeing Thompson, being in the ring with Thompson for several rounds. My point is simply, what happens if David Price is wrong? What happens if David Price can't catch Tony Thompson when he opens up? What happens then? What happens if Tony Thompson starts coming around David Price's jab? Look at the films on Thompson, right? Thompson fights orthodox fighters over here. He's on this side. He's on the other side of your left jab. Have we seen David Price fight anyone like that? Take a look at David Price's resume. Tom Dallas. David Price was able to knock out Tom Dallas because, of course, David Price sparred with Tom Dallas before the fight. Right? David Price, Audley Harrison. Understand, this fight was after Audley Harrison had gotten destroyed by David Haye. Right? I think the Price people believe that Tony Thompson is mortally wounded. He's damaged because he got destroyed by Vladimir Klitschko. Well, let me just make a few points on that. Understand that in that Vladimir Klitschko fight, Tony himself went a few rounds, right? Went longer, certainly, than Audley Harrison did against David Haye. And let's face it, Tony Thompson has shown more ability against, let's say, a Vladimir Klitschko than an Audley Harrison did against David Haye. Right? So what I see here is a highly touted fighter with only 15 fights going up against probably America's best heavyweight. I like Tony Thompson. I'll agree that David Price has a huge punch and always has a puncher's chance in any fight, right? So I would hedge the play with Price by KO. But understand, I believe Thompson's going to be a big underdog in this one. I believe if this fight goes the distance, I don't care where it's held, I like Thompson's chances to win a decision. Let me also point out, as George Foreman learned when he fought Muhammad Ali a couple of generations ago, these big guys, like David Price, they look great in the first 2-3 rounds of a fight. You take them into the 8th, 9th, 10th rounds, don't be surprised if they've completely run out of gas and are completely exposed. As I pointed out here after David Price's last fight, if you look at the film, David Price's back hits the ropes a couple of times in that fight. Right? If a big man is in front of David Price and backs him up, I'm not sure if David Price can fight on his back foot. Right? So, really, I don't know what Price is thinking. If you're going to take the risk of being knocked out, take that risk in a heavyweight title match. Don't take it against a tough opponent like Tony Thompson. I like Thompson in this fight. Let me also point out, too, Thompson has an excellent jab. How do we know that David Price is even going to defend that jab? I like Tony Thompson to win the fight, hedged against Price by KO. You should get spectacular odds. This is the kind of play where you need to circle the calendar. I think the public is going to be thinking wrong on this one. Let me point out, too, that Price by KO should be, in my opinion, a viable hedge. In other words, it shouldn't be the absurd line that you're getting in the Lucas Matthysse-Mike Dallas fight. It should be something closer to even money. Whereas Tony Thompson win the fight, I'll be surprised if you're not getting at least 4-1 odds on that part of the play. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com, DwyerVIP.com, and on Roku, Dwyer Boxing, a private channel. Thanks for watching.